my co-authors, Steve Petty and Anna Garber, I'm delighted to welcome you this afternoon. I am Colleen Shannon, and my partners in this endeavor I've already introduced. We three are the midwives, or mid-husband, of this new history book. The stories are your stories and the stories of your ancestors, and we have just brought them to life in this book. I want to take a moment to recognize and celebrate your ancestors. Is there anyone here who is related by blood to the indigenous people who once roamed this land? If so, please stand. Well, I'm not surprised. It is important for us to recognize and acknowledge that we are gathering today on the traditional lands of the Cherokee Nation. Looking over the audience, I can tell a number of people would stand whose ancestors were here by 1800. Your ancestors were the sturdy souls, mostly Scots-Irish, who saw in this valley a similarity to the lands they left back home. They were independent, hardy, and wanted the freedom this land promised. So if your ancestors were here by 1800, please stand. By the mid-19th century, yet more European American settlers had arrived, and with them came the enslavement of people of African descent. Stand if your ancestors, either black or white, were here before the Civil War. The next 100 years would bring many changes to this valley. Small farms flourished, then returning soldiers from the 20th century wars found homes here, as did those who were displaced by the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the TVA dams. Please stand if your ancestors arrived between 1865 and 1965. Wow, we're all old-timers or newcomers. Now, this leaves two groups. The first is those of us, like the three authors, who have moved here for jobs, family, or retirement in the last few decades. Please stand if you fall into that group. If you moved here in the last 40 years. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't notice that someone stood up.
The lady in green over there said she was indigenous.
Oh, I'm just wondering. If you don't, the last group doesn't even live in Seymour or the Boyds Creek Valley. But if you are a history buff and came just because you love what we're doing, please stand. If you don't know when your ancestors came here, don't worry. Reading the book may help you figure that out. You are the audience for which we wrote this book, all of you. The old-timers, the newcomers, and those who just love history. This book launch has been a long time in the coming. It's almost 4 years ago that we got started. It was October of 2019 when a crowd like this gathered at the Oak City Baptist Church to hear a program on Island View School by Dr. John Plummer and the late Dr. Sam Wild. We anticipated a large crowd, so we moved the event from the library to the church. What we didn't anticipate was the outpouring of interest in the general history of this area. When it was time for questions from the audience, speaker after speaker mentioned the 1980s book, A History of Boyds Creek by Estelina Bradson and her daughter Margaret Bradson Hicks. The book had been long out of print. Even the library copies had disappeared. Old-timers and newcomers alike wanted to get their hands on a copy. And we actually have 4 copies left here if anyone wants one. On the way back home that night, Anna and I began talking about the possibility of reprinting A History of Boyds Creek. When we approached Margaret Bradson Hicks and her brother, the late Ben Bradson, they generously gave us permission to reprint the books with all of the proceeds coming to the library. We did that and raised more than $5,000 from the reprint. Margaret, please stand so that we can recognize you. By early 2020, we realized that we were on to something big. The Bradsons had told much of the history of this area in their book, but we discovered the community was rich in untold stories. They just needed to be dug up and shared. And this we wanted to do, the 3 of us. Now Anna will tell you how we went about creating this book.
Well, I was asked to say what we did to create this book. And my answer is, what didn't we do? Colin is the ideas person. And she came up with the idea of first asking Margaret if we could reprint that book. And then she came up with the idea of a bigger and more up-to-date book. And then when I was discussing this with Steve, whom I've known for a long time, I uttered the magic word map. And Steve was it. Steve is a map person. I don't know how many maps he's looked at in the past 4.5 years. Old maps, new maps. But anyway, he's been our map expert. And so we decided to divide the work up. I wrote the main narrative. Colleen wrote the chapters on the enslaved people who gradually became part of the community, and also on the churches, very rich history here of the religious community. And Steve wrote the transportation part, which sounds, it sounds just like roads, but no, it wasn't just roads at all. Steve discovered some amazing stories about railways and steamers on the river, and at one point the French Broad was actually the interstate of the world. So there's a lot in the book about that. And we started with 1 or 2 families that we knew of, the Bradsons obviously, and Dr. Lyle gave us a lot of information. And everybody we talked to, they all said, you need to talk to so-and-so, you and we'd go off to talk to so-and-so, and they would say, you need to talk to somebody else. And what's more, I'll call them and tell them about you and make it easy for you. And that happened a lot. Now, there were times when we had to actually go up and knock on doors. Can you not here? When we actually went cold turkey up to doors and some got on courage and knocked on the doors. And a lot of times people said, come on in, see my beautiful historic house. It was wonderful. This whole thing has been the most incredible experience for us. We also did a lot of research. We went to the internet, which gave us ideas, which we then checked out with other sources. We went to the local libraries. We went to King Family Library in Sevierville. And we also went to the beautiful McClung collection in Knoxville. And that in itself is worth a visit just because the building is so beautiful, so calm, and it's just the most incredible place to do some quiet work. Anyway, that's what we did. Then we also were doing all kinds of fun things. We met people who wanted to take us for rides, and we went on rides all around the back roads. And then, I don't know whether Kent was here this afternoon, he took us on some scary rides on places that he said used to be roads. Which were really just gaps between trees. Anyway, that was part of it. But there were stories in the backwoods, places that don't exist anymore. Colleen and I traveled through brambles at one place, looking for a dormitory that had been opposite opposite the Wayland Inn. And I don't know how we got in there. It was a lot easier getting out. It was pretty sure not to lot of brambles down getting in there. But there was nothing there. So anyway, there was that kind of experience. We also learned to learn cemeteries. And cemeteries are incredible places for finding out the truth about certain people, to find the relationships, to find out a little bit about what people's lives were like. Some of the epitaphs on those gravestones are incredible. And we also found out how you can go up to a gravestone that you can't read and make it legible. So that now we all three of us drive around with our gravestone kits, which is shaving cream and a piece of plastic back on the car. Spray shaving cream on a gravestone and then spray it with plastic so that you can read what's happening. And the other thing about the cemeteries is that people wanted to be close to heaven, and some of them are in the most beautiful spots imaginable. So Corey, well, we all three staggered up a bunch of very steep hills. Then we watched Art Bohannon with his magic machine, who showed us that he somehow, I don't know how this works, but somehow he could locate graves where there really aren't any. That's totally amazing too. That was another experience we had. We climbed through barbed wire, we climbed over barbed wire, under barbed wire, through barbed wire. Yes. We went down, as we were researching this, we went down a lot of virtual rabbit holes where we thought we found stories, we'd get really excited and then suddenly it would fizzle. And we thought, no story there. But it was still fun going down the rabbit holes, and there were plenty of those. And all the time, I think the three of us, we had our moments that we managed to get on extremely well. Colin's the ideas person. Steve, towards the end, dragged us through the ending of this by pure organisation. They were incredible, both of them, and I want to thank them personally very much. I feel very honoured to be part of that trio that did this. We also made some promises, which I'm afraid to say we did not keep. We promised some people we would come back and talk to them, and we didn't.
Volume 2.
Sorry?
You could have a volume 2.
Definitely not volume 2. But that brings up another point. There is a volume 2 out there. We know that not everything that maybe not everything you're expecting to read in that book will be there. Because we simply had to set a deadline. We have eventually to stop enjoying ourselves and get this book done. And last winter we went into edit mode. We met at one another's houses. We had some wonderful soup lunches, and we argued over what should go in the book and what shouldn't. I was accused of slashing and burning their coffee. Well, I considered it gentle pruning. So anyway, but eventually we got the book done. Many thanks to Steve who kept us on track. It has been a totally wonderful experience, and the great thing about this was meeting so many of you. The people here have just been very welcoming to us, incredibly generous. You've shown us documents that we never knew existed. You helped us find other pieces of history that we didn't know existed, and I just want to thank you. So Steve has more to say about the wonderful people he's helped us, and that's his turn. Thank you.
Out of place. You can see how proud we are of this book, and it is our hope that you and the community will be proud of it when you read it. I want to tell you a backstory that most of you don't know, but I think when you hear the story, you will be even more proud of the community that you live in. When we got near the end of the two phases Colleen and Anna described, we began to believe it might, in fact, become a book. We slowly began learning about the publishing process, and our fears about cost were confirmed. We needed editors, consultants, designers, photographers, and mapmakers, but we had no budget whatsoever. When the approximate cost of these services and printing were added, we realized there would be little left for Friends of the Seymour Library. We got stubborn and decided there must be an alternative. One by one, local people with these skill sets crossed our path and began to volunteer their professional skills, and for some, endless hours to make this book a possibility. I'm going to name these people, and when I do, I want you to stand. Stay standing, and at the end, we'll give one round of applause. First of all, we had two editors that read every page of the book at least 3 times and gave extensive feedback each time. Janet King is a retired teacher, English teacher, and librarian with 36 years in Seymour schools. She has lived on property that includes a portion of Buckingham Island since 1969, when she married David Temple King, who was raised here and was the great-grandson of Rachel and Andrew Jackson Temple, who built Oak City in 1906. She offered feedback on the modern history of the area, as well as the essential sentence structure, punctuation, all of that kind of stuff. And I assure every one of you, if you ever find yourselves in a comma war, you want Janet on your side. Thank you, Janet. Charles Ogle is a retired history teacher who taught 38 years in Seymour schools. So he beat Janet a few years. He lives in Seymour with his wife Judy Bailey Ogle. His family has lived in Sevier County since the late 1790s and moved to Seymour in 1917. He gave us invaluable response from a historical perspective. It was not uncommon that he would ask if we knew a certain story related to something that we had written. Sometimes he would do a little research to verify his facts and hand us additional information. He's your guy if you ever compete in a history league again. Thank you, Charles. The third editor was Jamesina Miller, who planned to be here, but her husband was diagnosed with COVID yesterday. I know. She lives in Sevierville, but has deep roots in the Chandler Gap community. She is descended from some of our community's earliest enslaved people, Jenny and Charlie. Jenny was the Chandler's beloved enslaved cook at Wheaton. Jamesina provided invaluable information and feedback for the 3 chapters that tell the story of Black people in our community. She is a wonderful person who has made endless civic contributions to Sevier County. Next, we met Deanne Hoppe. Sorry, Deanne. I don't get it. Stay standing. Who is a graphic designer and owner of Topping Consulting. She lives off McCleary Bend Road. She was raised in Nova Scotia and is married to Dwayne Topping, who moved to Seymour in 1984 when he was 5 and attended Seymour schools his entire childhood. Deanne designed the inside of the book, put it in publishing software, and designed the beautiful cover that you saw until the screen went black. Deanne is an absolute joy if you don't know her. Next, we met Bea and Terry Graham, who are professional photographers and owners of Southern Comfort Photography. They retired to our community from Milan, Ohio in 2013 and live off Indian Warpath Road. They had visited the area for 30 years and always dreamed of living there. They gave us the front cover photo, many of you have it in your hand, which shows the confluence of Boyds Creek and the French Bog River, the very spot where this community began. You can find their work on Facebook. Craig Oliver, are you here, Craig? There you go. Craig Oliver is an amateur photographer whose family has lived in Seymour for 2 generations. He provided the beautiful back cover photo of the sunrise over Bluff Mountain, one of the most iconic spots in Seymour. The exact same view would have been seen by Samuel Newell and family from their home at Newell Station, the first home and fort built in Sevier County. Craig's photos can also be found online. Bob Davis is a retired mechanical engineer, pilot, and amateur photographer. He has lived with his wife Lynn on Pine Ridge since moving here in 1987. He provided aerial photos, 2 of which you will see in the book and others in future presentations. He also is quite a steamboat buff and has provided valuable information on that subject. Bob's book about steamboats, Steal Away to Knoxville in 1902, will soon be available in Sevier County Library. Brian Fain is a graphic designer who grew up in Seymour. Unfortunately, he is out of town and couldn't join us today. He designed 3 maps, which you will see in the book. Also, he is currently creating a 16 by 20 decorative and historical wall map of the Seymour Boyds Creek area. It will be a companion to the book and will be available for purchase hopefully by the end of October. It will also benefit Friends of Seymour Library. As you can see, this small army of 90 talented local volunteers, without whom this book simply would not exist. Please give them a rousing. leave Seymour, Boyds Creek newspaper. Isn't that wonderful? As this army was completing their task, we had to face the cost of printing. It was going to cost 41% of the proceeds from this book, from sales of this book. We got even more stuff. We approached 3 community members who are descendants of some of the earliest settlers in Seymour and Boyds Creek. All 3 readily agreed to underwrite 1/3 of the cost of printing because of their love for and pride in this community, just like the 9 volunteers you heard about. The first donor is Kathy Cresswell. Stand up, Kathy. Kathy owns property on Mill Down Way at the site of the old Payne's Mill on the banks of Boyds Creek. Kathy is descended from Andrew Cresswell, who arrived here in 1786 or 87. He later married Dorothy Evans, who arrived with her parents in 1783. Kathy's ancestors include many early settling families. The second donor is Candy Cresswell Clark. She lives on Pine Ridge on land that has been continuously in the Cresswell family since they settled here. Kathy is also descended from Andrew and Dorothy Evans Cresswell. Like Kathy, her ancestors include many of the early settling families. And the third donation is from Ben and Lucinda Braxton. Ben is descended from John Braxton II, who settled here in 1794 and later married Elizabeth Davis. Ben lives on Braxton Ferry Plantation, which has been continuously occupied by the Braxton family since it was established. These donations have ensured that every penny of almost $14,000 from the sale of these books will go to Friends of Seymour Library. We're at a crossroads. It had been suggested that we each read a short excerpt from the book. Then we decided not to because it would keep you sitting and listening too long. And then the subject has come up again. So we're not sure what to do. Are you guys tired, restless? Would you like to move around, have some cookies and something to drink? Or would you like to hear just a little bit out of the book? A little bit? Okay, we'll give it to you.
See how your public speaking is.
What'd you say?
See how your public speaking is.
Steve, I know my part really well, but I don't know it off my...
Well, yeah, we need to vote on it.
I've edited this so many times. I want to read from the beginning of chapter 1. The Sevierville Valley of Boyds Creek was born in violence. Hundreds of millions of years ago, 2 continents crashed together when North America and Africa collided. North America buckled and huge masses of rocks pushed upward to form the Appalachian Mountains. Running from northeast to southwest, roughly parallel to the Atlantic coast, the Appalachians are among the oldest mountains in North America. Great folds in the fabric of the mountains run at right angles to the general flow. Only 3 rivers have reached those folds. The ironically named New River out of West Virginia, the Susquehanna in Pennsylvania, and the French Broad, which begins in North Carolina before cutting into Tennessee. It has long been believed that the French Broad may be 300 million years old or more, one of Earth's oldest rivers. Rumor has it that it's the 3rd oldest after the Nile and the Nile. but there are other containers to fill the place. Some geologists estimate that the French Broad formed much later. One geologist, Professor Robert D. Hatcher of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, presented scientific evidence in 2020 that the French Broad is just 5 million to 10 million years old. These mountains are not as old as we've been taught, he said. The river begins as a trickle in Highland, Transylvania County, North Carolina, and flows 218 miles out of the mountains to Knoxville's Three Rivers, where it joins the Huskey to form the Tennessee, about 4 miles upstream from the Boyds Creek Bridge. Wilma Dykeman, in her book The French Broad, describes it as a fat river flowing into a fruitful land. Millions of years after its creation, the Cherokee people called the rivers of the region, including the French Broad and the Tennessee, Abiqua, the long man, whose head in the mountains and his feet in the sea. Its tributaries they called the chattering children. The long man, they believed, fed, refreshed, healed, and cleansed the Cherokee, spoke to them at waterfalls, protected them from bad thoughts and sadness, and provided for their spiritual well-being. While the Cherokee and their forebears did not worship the river, they revered and protected it. Boyds Creek itself is one of the long man's chattering children, flowing from the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains along a fertile valley through what is now called Seymour to join the meandering French Broad. It is fed by Pampered Creek, and Mouth.
Okay, for some of that boring transportation. When I finish, I want to see a show of hands of how many of you would like to have done the same thing. This is an entry from 1783. Following the Revolution, settlement began to occur south of the French Broad. Travel to this area on the trails and wagon roads was always rough, though sources vary as to how rough they were and when the roads were improved to accommodate wagons. According to First Families of Tennessee, the early roads were merely a horse path over which men and animals could move in single file. Historian Samuel C. Williams stated, the women folk and the young children rode horseback, the men and larger children marched on foot. The pack horses carried the scanty household effects, and the boys aided the men in driving cattle and swine, which brought up the rear. These descriptions were surely true for early settlers, Tennessee settlers on the Watauga, Holston, and Nottoway rivers in upper East Tennessee in 1768 and 69. Hart Rouse Jr. in the Great Wagon Road wrote that the trail southwest from Big Lick, which is Roanoke, began slowly turning into a wagon road after Fort Chiswell, which is Woodville, Virginia, was built around 1761. It would most likely not have made it into Tennessee in 8 years. There is some evidence that the wagon road extended to the southwest corner of Hawkins County, Tennessee by 1783, although widening the trails to accommodate wagons involved a little more than clearing trees, stumps, and undergrowth. Moravian missionary Martin Schneider traveled through Boyds Creek in 1783 on his way to the Cherokee villages south of here. In his diary, he stated that the wagon road ended southwest of Rogersville, where he took a trail that he thought to be the warpath until it became undiscernible. After turning back and finding a guide, he eventually made it to today's Sevierville County, where a Cherokee man took him to the home of Joshua Gist to spend the night. The next morning, Gist took him to the warpath crossing near the mouth of Boyds Creek. Now, think about how you got here. Would you rather do it that way or this way? Yeah, pretty interesting stuff.
This is chapter 5, the early black life in Boyds Creek, from 1790 to 1860. His owner called him Ned. About 25 years of age, Ned was described as having a black complexion, a very sensible fellow when spoken to. In 1796, Thomas Buckingham placed an ad in the Knoxville Gazette offering a reward for this runaway slave. This ad may have been the first documentation of a named person of African descent in the Boyds Creek Valley. According to Bill Carey in Runaways, Coffles, and Fancy Girls, and I quote, slaves were in East Tennessee when it was known as the Washington District of Southwest Territory, perhaps even before 1790, before the state of Tennessee was organized or Sevierville was founded. Men and women of African descent were being bought and sold, were being given away in lotteries, and were escaping, like Ned, from those who held them in bondage. Still, they were not the first blacks to see the Boyds Creek Valley. Some black men undoubtedly accompanied conquistadors as volunteer expedition members or involuntary slaves. As anthropologist R.R. Wright wrote in 1902, and I quote, historians were not careful to note with any degree of accuracy and with due credit the useful and noble deeds of Negro companions of Spanish conquerors. Such omissions would continue to be the case in many future documents and histories of this country. Some men of African descent were already living among the Cherokees in the southeast as spoils of war, or in trade from European hunters, or as runaways from bondage. While some blacks were enslaved, others were adopted into the tribes as full members, marrying and producing children with Cherokee women. Some of the first European Americans to claim land in the Boyds Creek Valley brought enslaved men and women with them to work the land, erect buildings, and create income for their owners. This included land speculators like John Sevier and his contemporaries, all slave owners who would soon codify the terms of slavery and the laws of Tennessee. According to Sevier's diary, he regularly traveled with his black enslaved manservant, Toby, who was one of the few people Sevier trusted to carry messages for him.
If the burning question will entertain it, needs to be really burning, because it seems like it's time to move about, have some cookies, and get something to drink. Anybody question? You just can't leave here without it being answered? All right, Don.
What was the most surprising factoid or fact that found from research?
Well, for me, one of the most surprising, a lot of people know about the Great Indian Warpath, but I had never heard and have met very few people who knew that there was another trail that started off the warpath at the mouth of Boyds Creek, and that was the Tuckaleechee and Southeastern Trail. It went southeast to the Little Pigeon River, followed the Little Pigeon, split at the mouth of Walden's Creek. One board went up over the mountain and became eventually Newfound Gap Road. The Tuckaleechee and Southeastern meandered through to the Cherokee villages between Walden and Townsend, and then went into the park, became what is today Walls Creek Road, crossed the Smokies at either Spencefield or Russell, and came down on the other side in the vicinity of Fontana Dam. These were 2 of 3 major trails through the Smokies that connected the Warpath in the north to the Unicoi and Catawba trails in the south. That was brand new information, and I have run into very few people that know about that trail. So we had 2, and they both became major roadways going in different directions out of Boyds Creek. So, one burning question got answered. Oh, got another burning?
First African American who became president of America was in this area. He was in Sevierville and the Congress. And I failed to find except one place where some of these judges were living. Told that also some obvious they brothers live in this area as we pass input into
This will be the lady to answer that question. Repeat the question for people.
Reverend Thomas was asking about the formerly enslaved black man Reverend Blackburn, who was pastoring the Cedar Presbyterian Church,
New Providence.
at New Providence, freed and taught so that he became the first black pastor in this area, but then went on to Philadelphia.
Philadelphia found he was first African American to be a president of the
Right. And Reverend Thomas has written a book about him. And so if you're interested in that, you can speak with him afterwards. But I do want to tell you a very, very quick story. This was the second African American pastor who was freed from slavery. His enslaver was George Doherty in Dandridge, and the Reverend Isaac Anderson is the one who purchased him because he saw the great potential in this man to be a preacher or pastor. This man was named George Erskine, and after he was educated and began pastoring, he traveled all around this area to raise the funds to buy his family from enslavement. He then, with his family, went to the west coast of Africa, what we now know is Liberia. Unfortunately, he and his wife and some of their children succumbed to tropical diseases within the first year they were there. But his daughter was determined that she was going to succeed, and she married. They raised coffee together, raised a family, and she began work on a quilt. She wanted to make this quilt for Queen Victoria because Queen Victoria had sent warships to the coast of Africa to keep the enslavers from reaching the people in the countries in the West Coast. And she wanted to thank Queen Victoria. She finished that quilt. She embroidered it with coffee trees, and her community raised the funds for her to travel to England, and she presented the quilt in person to Queen Victoria. Any other burning questions?